For thousands of years, the human mind was this ultimate black box. We could talk about it, we could wonder about it, but could we ever really study it? Well, that's what we're going to get into. How we went from just guessing about what's going on in our heads to building an actual science around it. I mean, it really all boils down to this one super tricky question, right? How do you prove what's happening inside someone's head? Seriously, think about it. How do you take a feeling, a memory, a thought, and put it under a microscope? This was the huge hurdle psychology had to clear to even be considered a real science. So, for like 2,000 years, the study of the mind, it wasn't a science, it was a conversation. It belonged to the philosophers. They didn't have labs and beakers, they had armchairs and, deep thoughts. It was an amazing time for big questions and brilliant debates. But there were absolutely zero experiments. And right at the heart of all this was the man himself, Aristotle. This guy was asking all the right questions. What is a memory? Why do we feel happy or sad? These are the exact same questions we're wrestling with today. But his method, it was pure thought, pure logic. He had no way to actually test if his brilliant ideas were, right. And this is where you see the huge flaw in that approach. Because without experiments, even a genius like Aristotle could get things completely, fundamentally wrong. Get this, he was convinced that the heart, not the brain, was the center of all our intelligence and feelings. I mean, it's a fascinating idea, but that's all it was, an idea. There's zero proof. Okay, so this really lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the philosopher's way, Aristotle's way. Brilliant questions for sure, but it all comes down to opinion. No experiments, no proof. And on the other side, the scientist's way, this whole new method, taking those big questions and making them testable. It's not about opinion anymore, it's about data. A huge revolution was brewing. And boy, did it take a while for that revolution to kick off. We're talking nearly 2,000 years after Aristotle. But when it happened, it happened. The time for just sitting around and thinking was over. One guy basically decided to trade in his philosophy robes for a lab coat and do the impossible. Start measuring the unmeasurable. 1879. Just remember that year, because this is the moment everything changed. It's like the official dividing line in the history of psychology. There's a before 1879 and an after 1879. And this massive shift didn't happen in some grand university hall or anything. Nope, the science of the mind was born right here, in a tiny little room in Leipzig, Germany. This was it. This was the spot where psychology finally stopped being just a conversation and became a real hands-on experiment. And who's the guy who opened that door? Wilhelm Wundt. We call him the father of psychology, and it's for a really simple reason. He was the very first person to say, we need a place, a laboratory, dedicated only to the scientific study of the human mind. And then he actually built it. Yeah, his whole mission was basically, I don't want to just talk about thoughts anymore. I want to measure them. He was just tired of all the talk. He had this radical belief that all the hidden stuff going on in our brains, thinking, seeing, feeling, that all of it could be timed and measured, just like you'd measure, anything else in the natural world. So the big question is, how did he actually do it? How do you take that giant leap from philosophy to hard data? Well, it all started with an experiment that sounds almost ridiculously simple, but it would literally change everything. Okay, so Wundt's main tool was this technique he called introspection. And it sounds complicated, but here's the gist. He trained people to be super careful observers of their own minds. He wasn't just asking, so how do you feel? No. He was telling them to break down every single sensation into its tiniest little pieces, like finding the atoms of their own experience. All right, check out his most famous experiment. It seems way too simple, right? Step 1, a ball drops and makes a sound. Step 2, a person hears it. Step 3, they pressed a button the second they hear it. And Wundt's just there with a stopwatch, timing the whole thing. But wait, the real genius wasn't in that part. It was in what he did next. So, first up, he measured the time it took for someone to just hear the sound and hit the button. A basic reflex. And the time was about 1/10 of a second. Pretty fast. But then, he changed the rules just a little bit. He told them, okay, this time, don't press the button until you are consciously aware that you've heard the sound. So not just when you hear it, but when your brain registers that you've heard it. And the time for that? 0.2 of a second. And that's it. That's the whole thing. That tiny little gap, that extra tenth of a second, that wasn't just a random delay. That was the time it took for the brain to do a mental task, to become aware. This was the first time in history anyone had actually measured the speed of thought. Mind-blowing, right? You can just imagine what happened next. One simple little experiment basically opened the floodgates. What started in that one small room in Germany, it did not stay there. It totally sparked a global movement. And look at how this thing just exploded. You start with Wundt's one little lab in 1879. Then his students just fanned out all over the world. They started opening new psychology labs and departments in Europe, in North America, everywhere. And that's what built the foundation for the huge, sprawling field of psychology that we have today. And you know what? Wundt's revolution is still all around us. I mean, every single time someone goes to therapy or takes a personality test or even gets a brain scan like an fMRI, that's all part of his legacy. Heck, even the way the apps on your phone are designed, that user experience research, it all goes back to this one core idea that we can study and understand how the mind works. So, here's the big takeaway from all this. Wundt proved that our thoughts aren't just some invisible, untouchable magic. He showed us that the mind isn't some deep philosophical mystery we can only talk about. No, our thoughts, our feelings, they're part of a beautiful, measurable science. They're part of a complex biological machine that we can actually explore. Which kind of leaves us with one last thought for you. When you try to figure out your own mind or understand the world, are you going to think like Aristotle? Or are you going to think like Wundt? Do you stop at the brilliant question? Or do you go looking for the proof?